is author and publisher of Asia Hard Assets. Peter's a property consultant, financial advisor, and investor here as well. 53 cities in January, 66 month on month. So they just keep going up.
Definitely. You did see in 2011 with the cooling measures at that time, we did see a fall in prices at that time. But since the beginning of last year, we've seen back on track. Volumes are up again. In fact, although volumes were down last month, they are still up significantly from where they were this time last year. So we're definitely seeing more activity in the property market, and I think it brings with it the potential for some sort of cooling measures again, another round of cooling measures.
But they haven't had a chance for these ones to work yet, Peter.
Well, they did the last time. In 2011, the cooling measures worked. We saw property volumes fall by 30–40%. We saw property prices in many cities off significantly, 10–15% or so. So these measures do work from time to time. But the market is so strong, there's so much liquidity available, there is a genuine demand for housing in China.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, there's speculation, because obviously these curbs are very, very onerous when it comes to second and third properties that you may be buying. But first-time buyers can drive this market on their own, and you don't really want them to be locked out, do you?
Well, no, exactly. There's a real conundrum here. But, you know, the real issue is that China is basically lending more and more money. If you think back before the financial crisis, the total bank lending in China was about 3 to 4 trillion renminbi per year. Bank lending in the last 3 years has been more like 8 to 9 trillion. They've doubled the amount of lending, and much of that's going towards real estate. Well, so of course it's going to push prices up.
Peter, what role does the so-called shadow banking system play in all this?
Huge. We don't know the full numbers, but there are various analysts out there who are suggesting that the shadow banking is probably about 50 to 70% of the conventional banking.
Well, tell me how that works then.
Well, there's just all these various products. You have wealth management products, you have trust accounts, you have underwriting of guaranteed loans and so on. So what happens is that Mr. Chan, who can't get more than 3% in the bank, he will give it to some trust fund that gives him, say, 6%, and often it's the banks who funnel that money from the private wealth individuals through into these funds, and that gets lent. Traditionally, it gets lent into property. So you're getting not just the bank lending, but you're getting the shadow banking as well. So that's really driving this market very significantly.
How long will it go up? How long will it be going?
Well, the shadow banking system is really a worry. It's really quite dangerous. It smacks and it looks very much like the US market back in 2005, 2006. Collateralized debt obligations, all sorts of off-balance sheet vehicles in the banking system and so on. So we don't know how big it is, but we know it is very big. You also don't know what the genuine non-performing loan situation is in the banks in China. So, you know, China is a bit worrying right now.
It's all a bit murky. What about Hong Kong? Because we've got these new stamp duties, etc., and all these things slapped on to try and stop this rather frothy property market. And I'm being polite, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Hong Kong is not systemically so dangerous as China. The banks are not overextended, particularly to real estate. The population is not overextended. In fact, if you look at the numbers, about 60% of homeowners in Hong Kong have no mortgage on their property. And that was 52% like 5 years ago before the financial crisis. So people are under-leveraged. People are not highly geared. The bank's loan-to-deposit ratio is about 80 to 85%. So they're not systemically at risk. But the situation is that property prices have doubled since 2009. And, of course, that does send some warning bells that we are perhaps approaching a bubble situation. I don't think that's quite right, but the government is worried about it, and so they should be.
Peter, if you were looking across this part of the world and you had to advise somebody to buy a property here, where would you go?
Well, put it this way, I would look, for example, in some of the markets like New Zealand and Australia. Those markets, if we call them part of this region,
yeah, but
absolutely.
Australia's been on an absolute tear.
Well, it has been, but it's still down. In certain cities, it's still down from where it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I would be looking certainly at the commercial markets, and I'd be looking at real estate trusts, because many of these markets, the office rents and office prices prices are down from where they were a few years ago. Residential markets are strong, but in terms of commercial property, prices are down, rents are down, but they've probably bottomed out in these cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Auckland, and New Zealand. So that's an area I'd be looking at right now. For a housing point of view, I would still be looking at markets like New Zealand. As far as this part of the world is concerned, clearly Hong Kong and Singapore look a bit frothy, as you say, but quite frankly, over the next 5 or 7 years, we'll probably still do relatively okay in these markets.
Wow, Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Churchouse is the author of Asia Hard Assets. Now, after amassing unprecedented wealth during 14 years of world-beating economic expansion, citizens of BRIC nations are losing their patience with their country's share price performance. Let's get to more. This is the subject of Mia's Global